and it replaced an earlier one which had been built by patients back in the 1880s. So there's always been a fish pond here at Jaywood. I'm told that the original one had to go because it was in the way of the sewer line which was coming up the yard and down near the gate area there up to the main cell block. And the time capsule here was put down when the place officially opened as a museum at Easter 1994. And that was to be opened in 25 years' time, which if you count up on your fingers and your toes quickly enough, you'll realise was this year. And it actually was opened at Easter this year. But they decided to reseal it and reopen it in another 25 years' time. So if you're disappointed that you missed out on the first opening, you can come back for the second in 25 years' time. Okay? All right, we'll move along.
Find anything from there, or they'll just close it up? They were open, had a look and then closed it.
Very good. Now, this Buggy, which is an American model, so I believe, apparently they used to send them out here in kit form from America, and they were assembled out here in Australia. We don't know whether it was here at the jail during the jail days, but we do know that it was used by the psychiatrist superintendent over at the mental hospital to come over here to visit his patients all through the 1880s, 1890s, and right up until he bought himself a Model T Ford, I suppose. Then in the 1950s, it used to be driven up the street by one of the patients over at the mental hospital, a chap by the name of Billy. He was a trustee, and he used to drive it up the street to do messages for the mental hospital. And he became quite a common sight up the street, driving the mental hospital buggy. I have been told that you never distracted Billy while he was driving the buggy. Apparently if you waved and said, "Hi Bill," or something like that, he'd kind of steer towards you, and you're in danger of being run over by a four-wheel drive buggy, as it were. Then in the 1960s, it disappeared altogether. No one was quite sure where it had gone. But when this place opened as a museum in 1994, Dr. Eric Dax, I don't know if you've ever heard of him, he's a very famous name in mental health. There's a photo of him there, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him later. But he rang up the secretary of the Friends of Jaywood and said, "I believe you've opened the place as a museum. Splendid idea, splendid idea. Got something I'd like to send up to you." And a few days later, a truck turned up with this on the back. And apparently Dr. Dax had had it in his own private collection for all those years, because he didn't want to see it fall into rack and ruin over at Arradale, which is what would have happened to it. So he thought that he would look after it. But when he heard that the place had opened as a museum, he felt this is where it should be. So it's back home again, and we're very pleased to have it. I think the true story is his wife said, "If you don't get that bloody thing off the veranda, I'm going to burn it." But we'll go with the original story. It sounds better. Okay, we'll move along. Well, there's a couple of photos here of a sort of an outside shade building, which we believe was actually in this area here. Obviously, it was used for outdoor activities in the sun. All right, we'll move along. Look folks, what we have here is an example of 19th century graffiti, and that's not something you see every day and well worth the admission price in itself. There were 3 of these ship's paintings here at Jaywood, and that's what it is in case you can't quite work it out. There's one over there behind the oranges and lemons. That one's fairly well washed out, and the reason it's so washed out looking, I believe back in the 1950s, early 1960s, there was a German patient here who painted swastikas on the ship, and the staff here felt that that wasn't politically correct. So they rubbed them out with turpentine apparently, and I guess they removed half the ship as well. This one's still in pretty good shape, and there was another one further around which you can't see from here, but that's disappeared altogether anyway. But these have been documented back to at least 1886, so they've been here a long time. And what really intrigues us is that somebody was allowed to paint on the walls of a government institution back in the 1880s. You'd think that would be absolutely impossible, but somebody did. We've no idea who or why, so you may speculate amongst yourselves on that. Okay, we'll move along just a little bit further before we go inside. Right, we'll stop here for a moment because this is the site of one of the 5 guard towers they had here back in the jail days. There was one here, one on the opposite wall to this, way across the other side, 2 more at the corners of the exercise yard, and one above the exit from the cell block. That one is the only original tower left in the place, and you'll see that when we go through and out the other side. There's a photo here of the tower which used to be here, and you can quite clearly see the ship's paintings in that photo. So obviously they were still pretty young when the photo was taken. We're told that the guards used to be on duty for a 12-hour day, and if that wouldn't have been the most mind-numbingly boring job that you could possibly think of, being stuck up in these guard towers for 12 hours at a shift. They weren't allowed down while they were on duty. Their meals were sent up with a bucket and rope system. There was a toilet in the tower, which wasn't really a toilet, just a bucket, hopefully not the same one they sent the meals up in. And there they stayed for their 12-hour shift. Now, I mentioned before Dr. Eric Dax. He was brought out from England by the Victorian State Government in 1951 to head up the new Victorian Mental Health Authority. Now, before his arrival here, I think it's pretty fair to say that mental health was very much the poor relation of the health system. Anyone who had a mental health problem tended to be shoved into an asylum, locked away out of sight, out of mind, looked after by warders as much as nurses, and there they stayed. If they got better, that was good. If they didn't, they just stayed there for the rest of their lives. But we are told that Dr. Dax transformed the system, absolutely transformed it. He introduced new medications, new treatments. He insisted that all the staff become qualified psychiatric nurses, none of this warders business. And under his guidance and care, people were able to leave the system. They may not have been cured, but they learned how to control their conditions and re-enter society. So he really was a very famous name in mental health. He came to Ararat very early in his tenure to have a look at the institutions here under his control. First of all, he went and had a look at Arradale, then he came to J Ward. And we're told that when he came to J Ward, he looked up and saw these guard towers, and he was horrified. He said, this is not a prison, this is a hospital. Those guard towers have to go. And so they went. And we're very sorry now, because we'd like to have them back again. But it's too late, they've gone. The access to them is still there on the outside of the wall. It's a semicircular bluestone construction with a bluestone spiral staircase inside. But the actual towers have gone. But around about 12 or 13 years ago, the Friends of J Ward decided we really should have one back just to show what they look like. So they had one built. It cost $109,000. It wasn't cheap, but it's so hard, of course, to find people who can work with the bluestone. It's a lost art, it really is. In fact, the stonemasons who built it actually came from Queensland, so it really is very difficult to find stonemasons to do a job like that these days. But they did a great job, and you'll see it when we go through and out the other side. Okay, folks, we'll move into the West Wing now, which has nothing to do with the White House, unless you count Donald Trump leaving the airport. Come in. I don't really like rainy days in J Ward.